All right. Cool. Hello. Hello, everyone. My talk this evening is, well, good evening to all of you. My talk this evening will be on personal experiences of mine, very specifically growing up in the funeral home, in a funeral home environment, and what that's done to my perception of death, and how I believe one should handle death of others. This isn't just a talk of me telling you what I think. It's also supposed to go, hey, this works for me. This is what I've experienced with countless cases and countless people. So if you guys take anything from this talk, I hope you kind of better understand your own mortality and the mortality of others. That's, like I said, it's not a fun talk, but well, let's get going. So I saw my first corpse when I was 5 years old. I know I was 5 because I just was going into kindergarten, and that day I was visiting my grandmother who lived in the apartment on top of the funeral home. Now my dad dropped me off with her, and I eventually asked if I could go downstairs and get some candy. And now we had this little jar in one of the offices that would have either Jolly Ranchers or butterscotch, or if grandma felt like sharing, there would be those strawberry candies with the little creams in the middle, you know, the really good ones. Yeah. So I went down there, and I was about to go back upstairs to grandma's, and I heard a noise downstairs in the basement. So I, you know, as a curious toddler does, I went downstairs, and I looked to my right, and the 2 doors were open, and I see my father, and he had these like teal blue gloves on, and he was jamming some rod into some old man's neck. Now he quickly saw that I was there, kind of shook his head, closed the door, and came out and talked to me. Now, the odd thing about that situation is I don't really remember asking any questions. My father explained to me that I shouldn't have been down there at all, and that people die. See, I didn't know any other reality, and I think my post-toddler brain didn't so much accept this as a fact, but agreed, as though some part of me was saying, of course I knew that. What do you think I am, an infant? Like, no. Now here I have to note that I, of course, cannot exactly say what was going through my mind at the time. Perhaps I was afraid or confused or something else, but if that was the case, it was quick, it was meaningless, and it didn't have any impact on my memory. So, but that memory, though, remained vivid in my mind. But I never had nightmares about death or dying. It was never, did zombies trouble my sleep, or nor did ghosts or ghouls or crypts. You know. And as I grew in the shadow of the funeral home, I would visit my grandma frequently. And eventually I came to work as an assistant funeral director. This meant that I would stand around calling hours, refilling water, taking masses, donations for the families, and I would be introduced as a Pat's son. That was my main job. And when I was working calling hours, well, there's a delicate game that funeral directors have to play. They must be ever present, ready to help with the morning family, get them water, you keep conversation going. It's a definite problem when you've buried someone, and you buried their mom 4 months ago, but you don't know their name. So you got to do a lot of small talk. You got to do a lot of politicking as a funeral director. But at the same time, funeral directors have to be distant. In all likelihood, they didn't know the person who died, and you know, you used to be able to pay for people to cry over your dead loved ones. Now it's an insult. So all this together meant the funeral directors tend to work the room for a little bit, fix some flowers, and then hide in the basement or some back office. Now, naturally, the funeral directors would spend a good bit of time talking, and when they needed to fall back into the wallpaper. This meant that we would tell jokes. And I'm not talking like, what big cat don't you want to play games with? You know, a cheetah, you know. Not one of those jokes. I'm talking like, how do you get a nun pregnant? Well, you dress her up like an altar boy. Those kind of jokes, you know. That we would say those right as the father was coming in to give prayers over the corpse. Now, we didn't do this to be disrespectful. We did this to get by. I mean, you see, well, most funeral directors will tell you that dealing with dead bodies doesn't bother them. It's only a half-truth. I see. Life is an institution. It's an institution we buy into, one we believe. Most people exist trying to ignore the fact that it's arbitrary, this flimsy institution that is life. This makes it easier to continue existing and focus on what we want to focus on, and not just death. If we were constantly thinking about mortality, we would never be able to focus on anything else. Now, anyone who's constantly reminded of death via another person must either constantly accept that they too are going to die, or separate themselves from the deceased. In the latter example, the self assures itself that what has died is not the self, and that the self's institution of life is somehow greater than the deceased's. However, if the funeral directors are able to forget that they are around the corpse through paperwork, jokes, or even ignoring the body altogether, they are able to sometimes bypass this constant institution-shattering work. In short, you either remember that you're going to die, convince yourself that you're somehow different from the person who died, or ignore the whole thing altogether through jokes, busy work, etc. This is the burden of the elderly. This is the burden of the funeral director too, no matter how old you are. Now, the funeral home did, in a way, break me. When my grandmother died, I froze. I didn't freeze out of some great sorrow. I froze because I was very aware of why I was crying. I was crying because my father was crying. I was crying because my cousins were crying. I was crying because the jokes stopped working. I was crying because in that moment, I could no longer pretend that those who died were different than I was. I didn't want to be different from my grandma. I cried about moments in the past, not that they wouldn't happen again, but that they ever happened at all. Now, the fact that anyone loves anyone else is one of the grandest absurdities that ever has existed. And the death of my grandmother made me come to tears with the joy of love's existence, as opposed to not. But I did not cry because she died. I froze because I couldn't mourn her. Even my grandmother, a person whom I loved more than anyone else, couldn't invoke mourning in me. I had stopped caring about the dead. I had become, as some would say, jaded. Death is to me not something I can care about in and of itself. Sure, I would prefer a reality in which people are not sad, but I care not for the dead. One day, my father and I were eating breakfast. He was going through the obituaries on his iPad, and I was reading some old world novel. And without looking up, he told me that a friend of the family, not a close one, had died. My response was, oh well, it happens. And we continued on with our breakfast. The death of another human being passed through me with less force than a summer breeze. I stopped reading my book, and at that moment, I realized that because the death had happened and was entirely out of my hands, I couldn't bring myself to care. Now, I've had to face my own mortality over the years, and I've come out indifferent. Now, I do not want to die, but I do not fear anything. However, by not fearing anything, I can't bring myself to care for the deaths of anyone else. I decided when to break down and explore the institution of life, and took that power away from other forces. I traded control for chance. And I traded sympathy for this odd piece. That doesn't make sense. I have one last story that might crystallize some of it. One evening, I was alone in the funeral home. I had come to print something off downstairs and wandered into the parlor where an old man was laid out in an open coffin. Around him were flowers, pictures, and a cross. I approached the corpse and placed my hand on his. The skin was cold and stiff, and I looked at him and felt nothing. He was an object. Now, I turned to leave the room, and with my back turned to the coffin, my eyes caught a photo board with pictures of this man's life. He was a mechanic with 8 children. His wife had blue eyes and was only smiling in the pictures when they were together. His children all had children of their own, and as a grandfather, he seemed to be present. He enjoyed barbecues and festivals. And in the center was a picture of him a week before he had died. In that picture, he sat in an armchair, and next to that armchair was a smaller armchair, empty. And he was holding on to his left ring finger and was smiling softly. In that moment, I cared more for this photograph than I did for the thing lying behind me. And it was then I knew that death had no power over emotions. That's the domain of life. And as I left the funeral home that night, I felt no ghosts or guilt. I left the dead to the dead. That's my talk. That's kind of my take on it. So, there you go. If you guys have any questions, I'm more than willing to field any for a few minutes at least. But, yeah, that's my piece of fiction. Non-fiction. Piece of fiction. Oh, man. That's the story. So,
my dad's a dentist.
Your dad's a dentist, good, yeah.
The story's the same, it's just he's a dentist.
Yeah, my grandpa was a dentist.
That old guy was really just under anesthesia.
My
root canal.
My grandfather always would say, because my grandfather was a dentist, and my great grandfather was a dentist. My grandfather would always say that the reason he didn't become a dentist, it was too morbid for him. So he went to the funeral director. And bodies. So, yeah. But yeah, thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Is there anything? No,
Did you ever cut up any bodies?
Yeah. Legally, no. I never did that. On camera, I didn't. But yeah, I technically need a license. But, that's it.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan.
So today I would like to play for you 2 short things. One is a Bach fugue, or rather an excerpt from a Bach fugue. The second thing is the cadenza from Vieuxtemps Concerto No. 5 for violin. I just want to say a few things about the nature of a fugue before I start. The first thing is fugue is polyphonic, which means that there are multiple lines of music happening at the same time, which means sometimes I'll be playing one tune on one string and another tune on another string and possibly a third string simultaneously, which poses a whole new can of worms of technique issues for the violinist, which is part of the reason why these Bach pieces are essential to every single violinist's repertoire, which a lot of people are annoyed by that, but I personally love it because Bach is my favorite of all time. The second thing is a fugue is mainly defined by the repetition of a theme. So, for example, this fugue is built around, and that happens countless times throughout the fugue. And the third thing is that the fugue is a mind game. It's really a mind game for me, but it needs to look like it's a mind game for you, because your job is to hear that theme at the beginning and try to figure out where it is throughout the whole piece, because it turns up over and over again. But I am trying to confuse you by adding harmonies and different voices to disguise it, and I'm like hiding it and going, maybe it's here, no, maybe it's over there. Well, actually, I'm playing it now, but no, that was only half of it, and it's actually in this voice on the E string. And so that makes it complicated in my brain, because I have the added challenge of trying to make it look improvisational. which is hard to do when you're not actually improvising. Because students especially tend to play pieces like this that they've heard multiple times. Everybody plays them. Just like, I know what's happening, you know what's happening, I'm playing it, I really want to play the right notes, and I want to make it sound good, so here we go. The key is to treat it like a mind game and actually try to get involved with the process. So without any further ado, I'm going to play only about a fourth or a third of the movement. But these two pieces are what I'm playing for my juries this next week. So it's sort of a practice round for me. Like I said, cadenza from the Fifth Concerto. And the special thing about a cadenza is it's usually used to showcase virtuosity by the soloist after the concerto, or rather at the end of the first movement of the concerto. Usually the orchestra is accompanying the soloist, and then they drop out suddenly, and it's like you're all by yourself. The great thing is that you have the opportunity to phrase it however you want. You can take time wherever you want, and you're really just in charge of your own music. So all teamwork is thrown out the window, and you can be a diva and show off as much as you want.
bottom it had nice little lessons that you learn in kindergarten, like share and be nice to your neighbor and stuff like that. I'm not talking about this. I'm hijacking this poster to talk about improv club. All I really need to know is an improv club. So if you haven't seen the Sketch Up show, it's Miami's like improv group. We do free shows, usually 2 a month. They're really funny and really fun. You should come. I have been privileged to be a part of Sketched Out for the duration of this semester, and it's been a total blast. I hadn't done anything improv or comedy related at all before this semester. Didn't think of myself as particularly funny and still don't, but it's been like this crash course in what improv looks like and what it is and how to do it well. So this brief Scholotalk is going to be about just like kind of some basic principles of improv, and then also how read them like you would read this poster in that they apply to life too. So there's like and leadership and however you want to take that. So the first rule that I learned in improv was to listen. So when I'm in a scene with a scene partner, it's very tempting, especially starting out in improv, to try to think about the funny thing that I'm going to say next. Like, what clever thing am I going to do based on the situation? And that almost never serves you as well as simply listening to what the person you're in the scene with is saying, because comedy so often comes from a reflection of reality. We don't think that like crazy outlandish things are as funny as things that are a reflection of reality, and then we pull comedy out of them. So if I'm listening to what my scene partner is actually saying, it's a lot more likely that the scene is going to be effective and realistic and funny. And I think that's very clearly a life principle, to listen to team members, to listen to leaders, to listen to anybody that you're leading, and I think you'll be more effective in every area of life. We are more effective when we listen. This is kind of the famous, in quotes, improv principle, yes and. So you take what your scene partner is doing and run with it. So if Amanda is my scene partner and I walk up to her holding, and I say, hey, look at my turtle. And she says, that's not a turtle, that's a rock. The scene just kind of goes, like, it either gets awkward or there's nowhere to go with the scene. But if I take her my turtle and she says, oh, that's so cool, I had a box turtle when I was little, or points out that he has a little heart-shaped mark on his back. Anything to affirm what I have said and move the scene forward. The first thing that Amanda did in our hypothetical situation is a denial. And denials don't help make the scene funny typically, and they don't move it forward. I think that there's a lot of different ways to take this in real life. And I would like to point out that we don't have to say yes in every situation, because there is such a thing as a bad idea in real life. But I think it's helpful and important sometimes to take the good things out of bad ideas, and to affirm what we can in those things, instead of just saying, that's a really bad idea, and it just messes up the situation and isn't good leadership. So that's what I think about yes and. Make your scene partner look good. We did a couple workshops over the course of the semester, and one of the workshop leaders phrased it this way, is that in improv, one of your main goals is to elicit a reaction from the person that you're in the scene with. Again, this kind of goes back to the idea of, oh my gosh, what clever, funny thing am I going to say next? When you're focused on that, instead of getting a reaction from your partner, what ends up happening is two people trying to be funny, building themselves up, and they might as well go do stand-up by themselves or something. It's not a team effort, and it's probably not going to be as funny when people are trying to outdo each other. But if I'm in a scene with Amanda, and I'm trying to make her look good, and trying to say things that pull humor out of her, and she's doing the same for me, we're supporting each other as team members, and more likely the situation is going to be realistic, and it's going to be funny. And there's a lot of teamwork principles there, I think, too, being willing to serve and go out on a limb and just help your team members out, and make sure that there's mutual support going on, and the team will be more effective as a result. Make strong choices. The best thing that I can say about strong choices is a scene that took place in a rehearsal a couple months ago. But the suggestion was the grocery store, and we had a guy and a girl on stage, and instead of just, the girl was pushing her cart around, And she said to her significant other, it was clearly her significant other, said, grab some tampons while you're over there. Oh, and a pregnancy test. And that's a strong choice because that presents significant other with many options and many strong ways to take the scene. He could be excited about getting a pregnancy test, pleasantly surprised, negatively surprised. Wait, what did you just say? There's just a bunch of different ways that he could take that, pretty much all of which are or can be funny. And so that's another way of supporting your partner, is giving them a strong choice in something that's potentially funny or even potentially just strongly emotional to run with. And I equate in real life strong choices with big ideas, just thinking outside of the box and going big or going home in any kind of endeavor or project. And then the last one, this is kind of one of my favorite stories, but embracing the mistakes. So obviously, we don't want to have denials, and we want to be consistent in our scenes. But mess-ups happen. It's improv. We're making it up off the top of our heads. So sometimes I will establish that there's a door here. I'll push it open and walk through and close it behind me. And then the person who I'm talking to right here didn't realize that there was a door there and will walk straight through, and there's no longer a door there because he's walked through it. And so we know that these things are going to happen. They happen all the time. And the best improv that I've seen takes those mistakes and blows them up, basically. Sketch Out went to Chicago over fall break, and we saw a few different improv shows, one of which was the Improvised Shakespeare Company, which was just hilarious and absolutely fabulous. But one example that I like to take from them is, so the story happened between Venice and Naples, cities in Italy, right? They're both in Italy, yes. And if you didn't know, people from Naples are called Neapolitans. I didn't know that until the show. So. And somewhere, and that had already been established, people from Naples had been called Neapolitans. And somewhere over the course of the show, somebody had a brain fart and called them Nepalese people. Now, Nepalese is what people from Nepal are called. And so, instantly upon saying that, what his scene partner said, called him out on it, basically. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but he made fun of it. And what happened there was, now we have, from Naples, we have established both Neapolitan people and that the Nepalese are somehow involved in this storyline. And so it became a running bit throughout the rest of the entire show. And the last line of the show, it was a very, it was a tragedy. As an imitation of Shakespeare, it was a tragedy. And everybody died. And the last thing that happened in the show was a Nepalese coming up and killing the last person who was giving the closing monologue, and then did this, and was the Nepalese. And so, when you're really comfortable with improv, which I'm still not, but when you're comfortable with your team, and when you know that you're supporting each other, and know that you're all just trying to have fun and make believe and be funny together, you can call people out on their mistakes and make it funny, and that's a good thing, and we can run with it and bring humor out of that, because again, it's improv and we're going to screw up all the time. And obviously, as a life principle, mistakes are going to happen, but when we brush away the crap and the ways that our mistakes mess us up, and eventually take the positives out of those, we will benefit so much more from the mistakes that we thought there was nothing good in, and we'll grow and be better and have humor. So, that is what I have.